Hey, I'm Brad, and I'm stoked to be back in the chair for another episode of Overkill Reviews. By now, you've read the title, you know what I'm reviewing, so it's kind of ironic that my personal update is related to my job. But since BangerTV is also partly my job, I'm going to talk about my job in my job. Got it? So I manage a lot of sick bands, and they're killing it. So I've got to say a lot here, so Daniel will probably speed it up and make me look silly and put a bunch of posters up. But anyway, of Sulfur, they're on a co-headlining tour across North America right now with Mental Cruelty, Ghost Bath, Extermination, Dismemberment. By the time you see this, it'll be like halfway done, so check the dates. Don't miss it. Go. Signs of the Swarm. They're about to serve as direct support for cattle decapitation over in Europe and the UK alongside 200 stab wounds and Vomit Forth. Then right after that, they're going out with Thy Art is Murder, Angel Maker, and Snuffed on Sight across North America. Vitriol are heading across the US as part of the Chaos and Carnage tour with Cattle Decapitation, Carnifex, Rivers of Nile, Humanity's Last Breath, Zenith's Passage, and Face Yourself. Their new album, Suffer and Become, might be the most punishing release of 2024, and it came in January, so good luck to everyone who has something to follow. Orthodox are direct support for Boundary's US album release tour for Death is a Little More, along with Keonashi and No Cure. Tala are heading out supporting Kim Dracula and Jairus Johnson for a quick rip across the US and then a few dates back, while Crown Magnetar are doing the opposite with an extensive North American tour with Enterprise Earth, Inferi, and Tracheotomy, and that's after they're in Europe with Born of Osiris, Attila, and Aviana. Stabbing have a few fests and some exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. A lot, I told you. Okay, so it feels like I just spoke for 10 minutes, so it's all too appropriate that this week I'm reviewing an ever-evolving Arizona death metal band who haven't released an album in 10 years. More like The Forever Rock. Fucking kill me. Anyway, it's a new album from Job for a Cowboy called Moon Healer, out today on Metal Blade Records. So Job for a Cowboy formed in 2003 in Glendale, Arizona, and really burst onto the scene squealing like pigs with their 2005 EP Doom, which cemented them as a force in the then nascent deathcore scene. Backlash from real metalheads led to a quick reinvention and embracing of more straight up death metal for 2007's Genesis. I actually did an interview with vocalist Johnny Davey back in 2020 with Alt Press talking about that backlash and how they feel about that EP now. It's actually a really interesting read if you want to check it out. Actually, speaking of Johnny, he's the only remaining original member, with former Despised Icon guitarist Al Glassman joining for the follow-up, Ruination, in 2009. They toured their asses off, hitting basically every, major metal touring festival type run other than Ozfest. Like they did Sounds of the Underground, Mayhem, Gigantour, Summer Slaughter, Metal Allegiance, all the Euro festivals. Basically, they were just omnipresent key players in the scene until they weren't. They dropped Sun Eater in 2014, played one show in Vancouver, shout out Canada, and just faded away. I've seen in interviews that they purposely didn't announce that they were done. They just kind of stopped, kind of leave the door open. And I guess we are now at that door and about to walk through and see what Job for a Cowboy is like in 2024. So it's impossible to not talk about growth when discussing a band who went from having a nonsensical name, which was chosen, as far as I remember from interviews and whatnot, because its ridiculous nature prevented it from conflicting with other bands. If you wanted to call your band Death, for example, already done. Multiple bands, actually. Likewise with a lot of the bands that they were, the band names that they were thinking of, just striking out. So, hey, nobody's going to have a band called Job for Cowboy. So they went from that to writing this now pair of albums, one in 2014, one in 2024, that's like exploring the psyche of a friend who lost himself in psychedelics. That those albums came out 10 years apart only underscores this, but there is growth beyond these large leaps as well. So take, for example, their 2012 tech death opus Demonocracy and compare it to their 2007 debut on the death metal side, Genesis. And you'll see that there were bounds between there. In fact, those bounds can be I was going to say personified, but albums aren't people. It can be summed up with their 2009 masterpiece, Ruination, which is a perfect middle ground and indeed likely a reference point for many fans of this band's penultimate sound and era. And I mean, in my case, alongside their cheekily titled follow-up to Doom, Gloom. Doom, gloom, yeah. But for me, an even more important aspect of growth when it came to my perception of this album came from within, from self-reflection, with which these, psychedelically inclined cattlemen would no doubt appreciate. See, when Sun Eater came out, I was not nearly as impressed as my peers in music journalism and the wider metal scene at large. The album was received very well, which made the, fading away into temporary obscurity or hiatus more shocking. But it's hard to remove yourself, try as you might as a professional, which I, try to be, from the scene and era in which you are consuming media. So back then, I was kind of sick of tech death. We went from the era of Necrophagist, which is, essentially perfection. Then it was to this, beat you over the head, absurd showboatery, which was still heavy, but just sweeps and blast beats and inhuman playing. And we went from that then to a more, progressive, nuanced, musical approach that I found lost the heaviness in the search of this, off-kilter melody that was being chased. So when I heard this dancing bass that was clean and pushed high in the mix, it was off-putting to me because it felt almost like a betrayal to what I wanted from the band, which, childishly, I wanted still unfurling a now even darker gospel. But the best part of growing older is learning and admitting where you were wrong. There was more than enough of Job for Cowboy's early years in Sun Eater, dancing around and, swirling underneath the more progressive elements which were given the spotlight here. And removed from, my perception being colored from what was happening, I'm now able to appreciate the true mastery that was Sun Eater. I gave the album a 6. I think perhaps instead it should be flipped upside down to a 9. Nice. 69 jokes aside, a key element here is the intercourse. Interplay of the instruments. And I am including Johnny Davies' percussive belting as its own instrument. I can only imagine this album would be a trip to listen to under the influence of the substances that inspired it and its wild cover art, as these instruments really do feel like they're dancing around one another. It's hard to describe, but they feel like they're living, breathing beings that interact with one another and deliver exactly what each other needs at any given moment. And I would be remiss to not talk about the bass, which was such a central point of the last album. And here, once again, is forward in the songwriting and forward in the mix. It shines through and really elevates every moment. Even when it's playing along with the guitar, its tonality shines through and rises above with, maybe a well-placed, twangy part, just boop, right over the top of everything. And it brings this entire world to life. Check it out. As much as this is a testament to the composition and playing by the band here, it's also a testament to the mix and master, as music this dance could easily feel like an absolute clusterfuck if not masterfully, I didn't even mean to do that, presented. Their longtime producer, Jason Sukoff, nailed the mix. If you're at all unsure what mastering is, their mastering engineer, Ermin Hamidovich, did a video on his Systematic Productions channel, which shows you, first of all, how rock solid the mix was already before it was mastered, but really what mastering added to it and really brought to life.
This is the mix. And this is it with the full mastering chain.
And again, it really does feel and sound alive. A death reference right after I talked about the album being alive. I'm just full of zingers today. Yes, there are nods aplenty to Chuck throughout this album. And indeed, the career of Job for a Cowboy and Death runs in parallel with one another, starting from a more scrappy, rough around the edges Death band, in the case of Job for a Cowboy, Death Core, to a more refined death metal one, steadily ramping up their refinement and technicality until ultimately expanding into more progressive tendencies. It's almost as if they were bored of their own capabilities. They were too talented to keep it within the box. Anyway, the death pun, in case you missed the other half of it, is referring to cymbals, the pieces of metal that drummers use to hit with their sticks as accents. Or in the case of this album and drummer Naveen Copperweiss, much more. You may know that Naveen did an album with Johnny Davey back in 2010 for the project Flesh Rot, and Johnny essentially described it as a Naveen solo project that he put his vocals on. Naveen's current band, called Entheos, is almost like a spiritual successor in that he is the prime, or perhaps only, I'm not sure, composer, but this time vocally he's joined by his partner, Cheney Crab. It's almost as if removed from the shackles of being the sole or main composer, Naveen was able to focus all of his creative energy into just the drums and delivers one of the best drum performances I've ever heard. Jesus Christ. Check it out. My flesh, like the voices, rockets in my deep in the void, deep into the flames and now. I almost want to do that meme from American Psycho, where the dude is coming over the other dude's business card, but instead of talking about being embossed or off-white or whatever, it's oh my God, hear the subtle cymbal accents, the off-kilter groove. Oh my God, it even has ghost notes.
Something wrong?
And this level of playing is all over Moon Healer. You could honestly listen to the album solely for the percussion and have a great time listening to it and probably uncover new things every time. But you wouldn't do that. Guitarist Tony Sanacandro is literally a doctor, and I'm not sure how he finished schooling unless part of being a doctor involved unlocking a new step of human consciousness or energy where he can just stay up all the time and somehow do his schooling while crafting riffs this intricate and dense and intense. And I'll talk about the more ethereal aspects of the riffing in a minute, but I want to highlight the heaviness here because despite the overall composition and the more psychedelic vibe being a focus, there is still plenty of heavy on this album. Take, for example, Grinding Wheels of Ophanim, and I hope I pronounced that right, which is kind of the twin song to two songs from Sun Eater, a global shift in terms of speed and celestial antidote in terms of dissonance. And it brings them together for this monstrous song that touches on seemingly everything that this band does best when it comes to heaviness. And it grooves as well, which is a welcome reprieve to this music that at times is oscillating and swirling around itself and around you. Check out this section that I'm about to play, which sags from like groove to a beautiful solo to blast beats with dissonance underscoring it, right back into a solo. Less beautiful, more thought-provoking almost. That song's follow-up, The Sun Gave Me Ashes, So I Sought Out the Moon, also plumbs the depths of groove, bringing to mind, say, Gojira in a way. The riffs on this are dense, intricate, heavy. The album was written over the past like half a decade, and when you hear it, it shows. Psych, and I don't mean psych as in like psych, everything I just said was a lie and I'm gonna like, you know, pull out the rug and see you later, this actually sucks. I don't mean that at all. I rather mean psych as a prefix for two key aspects of this album, psychedelics and psychology. Psychedelics permeate the sound and ooze out of its pores in like this iridescent plasma that would get you high if you touched it, probably. It's both subtle and not at all. Take, for example, the opening of Beyond the Chemical Doorway, which opens the album and seemingly opens a chemical doorway, bringing to mind the feel of Mastodon's classic Crack the Sky album, on which they too embraced, you know, the beyond. Elsewhere, it's the bass peeking out everywhere, like this nod to your subconscious. You're so used to not hearing bass as much in metal, but it's like omnipresent here. It's everywhere, and it almost feels like it takes you to a different realm because you can hear the bass throughout the whole thing. The vibrato on the guitar and the bends seemingly scream from another world. The tones all over this thing just make it feel not of this world. To me, the buildup in the Forever Rot brings to mind like latter era Converge, which, you know, itself is heavily inspired by like moody Maestro's Neurosis, albeit this time it almost seems like it's viewed through a kaleidoscope, but for your ears, whatever the equivalent would be. A similar buildup on Grinding Wheels of Ophanim. See, I said it different that time, so I probably got it right, one of them, hopefully. Transitions from a less psychedelic take on that moody moment into something perhaps written atop a crystal mountain. More death references? So the other side of Psych is, as I mentioned, psychology. And indeed, the study of the human mind guides this sister album to Sun Eater. The titles even reference one another. They are opposites. In that album, the protagonist believes they're becoming closer to God through the use of psychedelics, but kind of like how Icarus flew too close to the sun and fell away. This time, that was also the case. In Icarus's case, his wings were made of wax and it melted. In this case, he had underlying mental illness issues that kind of, you know, you got a little too close to the sun, i.e. the drugs, and it kind of fell apart. From what I can decipher, I haven't read all the lyrics yet. I don't have them. I am excited to read them. This album is almost the inversion of the last one, where the character is able to almost transcend into or near godliness instead of descending into madness. As I mentioned, I barely scratched the surface in terms of the lyrics, and I'm very excited to do so, to read along and draw the parallels between this album and the last, and the story and what, they're trying to say and portray here. And that's a testament to how dense the album is. So despite the fact this album was crafted by people who are far older than the last time, there is an excitement, an exuberance to the album, and it transfers to you when you listen to it. It's fun to listen to. There's stuff dancing around each other and peeking out into your ear and saying, hey, did you hear this? Did you check this out? And it is just a joy to listen to. It genuinely is, and I can't wait to explore it once again alongside its predecessor with the lyrics, etc. I think it's a masterpiece. I'm sorry. Maybe I've gone soft in my old age of not reviewing very many albums anymore, but fuck it. I don't give a shit. I'm giving it 5 out of 5 skulls. They're psychedelic though. For shoutouts, first off, I'm gonna rewind to last month at the end of January. Vitriol, a band that I have the honor of managing, and their album Suffer and Become, which came out on Century Media. It is technical death metal by sheer force of will, just the need to create something punishing and as intense as possible, just coming out as virtuosistic playing, but also played with like this black metal intensity that just, the anger is palpable and surging and seething. You can feel it. This album is insane, and you need to listen to it. Now, out today is the new album by Darkest Hour called Perpetual Terminal on Monarch Heavy. These dudes mastered the melodic death metal, sounding as if they were from Sweden, despite the fact that they're from DC, and, have kind of explored with a few other sounds post that, most recently on Godless Prophets and the Migrant Flora, I believe was the name of the album. It was a lot more punk and hardcore, which kind of referenced their early days and the scene from which they came. So I'm really excited to hear where they take their sound this time around on their first album since, I think 7 years ago is when that one came out. It's been quite a while. Out on March 8th is the new one from Skeletal Remains entitled Fragments of the Ageless on Century Media. They're one of the most reliable bands in modern, old school death metal. They've been doing it since before it became super popular and a trend, a very awesome trend that I like very much amongst fans of the more hardcore side of music. They've been doing it for a long time, and they're old reliable, meat and potatoes, old school death metal made in the now. I've got to throw a shout out to Aborted and their album Vault of Horrors that comes out on Nuclear Blast March 15th. Every single song on this is about a different horror film, which I've had the honor of hearing, seeing as I do social media for Aborted. They've got a guest vocalist on every track. They've got Johnny from Carcosa, Dave from Signs of the Swarm, Ricky from Of Sulfur, not to toot my own horn in the bands that I work for, but then there are plenty of other people around. There's Matt from Cryptopsy, Ben from Shadow of Intent, Francesco from Flesh God Apocalypse, Jason from Ingested, and more. It is a party of an album. A great time to listen to, especially if you like horror and you can, peel back the layers. Speaking of Ingested, my last shout out, because I hear that we're running out of tape to film because I don't shut the fuck up, is by Ingested. It is called The Tide of Death and Fractured Dreams, which is a cool ass album title with cool ass artwork. And it comes out on Metal Blade April 5th. Ingested, this, brutal, slamming, death metal, kind of more steadily embracing the core side, deathcore. They are catchy, groovy, brutal, fun, and British. So why wouldn't you listen to it? Anyway, I'm going to stop because seriously, we're running out of tape and I got to go do my taxes.